Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Democratic route, Republican route. This is our topic for this evening. And we have Quon McElrath, retired member of the Board of Regents at the University of Hawai'i and a community activist. And Bart Dame, a community activist, member of the Democratic Party. And what we're going to be doing is talking about the significance and impact of the elections nationally and locally on Hawaii. So, AQ, would you like to give us your impressions about the elections, maybe nationally at first and then locally?
No. Well, it seems that the Democrats were able to pull off what many of us felt that they wouldn't be able to pull off, which is to gain a number of seats and actually to have control over the House and the Senate. I think also that the labor movement, despite the fact that there's been a change between actual AFL-CIO and Change to Win coalition, they turned out. I suspect they spent $40 million or something like that, but they turned out the troops. And so for the first time, it looks as though the Democratic Party will be able probably to do some things in the National Congress if they will be able to convince the person called, I think, George Bush, who's our president. And so it seems to me that perhaps we can take heart at what has occurred, although clearly within the Democratic Party there are people who are conservative Democrats as well as Democrats who are on the left. So the whole idea is what can they do to sit down and talk about perhaps a minimum program that they can begin in January.
Okay, that's good. And Bart, what about your impressions of the elections nationally and
well, I'm still sorting them out and going through. There are competing interpretations being fed in the media as to how we're supposed to interpret the election. We had the election and the Democrats won, but now there's a battle over the interpretation of what does the election mean. And the Republicans have come up with a conclusion. The reason why the Republicans lost is they weren't conservative enough. They had forsaken their conservative principles. And so they're saying the way forward is for the Republican Party to move to the right. In the Democratic Party, you have at least two contending points of view. One is that the reason why the Democrats won is because they ran as centrists. You have the progressives, on the other hand, who point out that actually of the freshmen that are coming into Congress, for example, and have taken over these seats, they are actually on the liberal edge of the party, and they were unabashed in support for traditional Democratic principles, which the more conservative Democrats have been distancing themselves from. To some extent, we saw that same dynamic at struggle here in Hawaii with Ed Case versus Danny Akaka. Danny Akaka running a more traditional Democratic Party kind of platform, but also speaking strongly against the war in Iraq, whereas Ed Case took the more centrist view. And that battle is going on within the Democratic Party all across the country.
Well, it seems to me also what really propelled the Democrats forward came with all of the corruption that has occurred among the Republicans within the last, well, really the last 6 months. And it seems to me that I think the voting public is beginning to see that it isn't just the, quote, Democrats who were in office who are the crooks, but you also have the crooks among the Republicans, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, in fact, I interviewed Noel Kent from Ethnic Studies Department at Mānoa, and he talks about those kinds of issues. So we'll watch that and then we'll have more discussion.
Blatant corruption of the Republican Party, I think, turned off a lot of evangelical voters and other people who've been faithful to the Republicans in the past. So I think this gives us a sort of democratic space to breathe and to reevaluate issues, and we'll see what the Democratic Party does. I do have some misgivings about the election in the sense that many of the Democrats who won from fairly marginal Republican districts, and they are going to be, I think, fairly conservative on most issues. I don't see the Democratic Party with a clear vision of where it wants to go in terms of the Iraqi quagmire which Bush got us into, the neoconservatives. And I think that's a problem. You know, when one hears about these schemes to divide the country up or to basically disengage, but to be a powerful presence in remolding Iraq, and all of that smells of the kind of imperialism that we've seen under Bush. So I think that's a real problem. My more fundamental misgiving about about the change in power, in a sense, is that it doesn't really impact the kind of the values, the vision, the structures that dominate American life today. I think that's the problem. The structures of power, of authority, of status, the increasing chasm between the rich and the poor, the erosion of the middle class, the gigantic kinds of monstrous debts that we've accumulated during the since the Reagan period, actually, in the country, and that will have to be paid back at the cost of a lower American standard of living.
Okay, so here's Noel Kent talking about the question of corruption, which you alluded to, AQ, and also the question of that Iraq loomed large in terms of the elections. So any comments, Bart, on?
Well, I think the corruption thing, I think there were things that were reinforcing each other at the same time. The Republicans increasingly looked like they were insincere and they were just out for their own benefit and that for the cronies, and also didn't look like they were very competent at doing things. Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting shifts that happened is like the Catholic voters shifted towards the Democrats in this election cycle. Latins shifted to young people turned out in much higher numbers. There was a 20% increase over the last midterm cycle. And all these people turned out in opposition to basically the Republican agenda. The war was very strong, but also on the question of values. Which were the values that were speaking to conservative voters? More and more, the war as an expression of like trying to fight for freedom or expand democracy looked like it was a sham, along with the other values that the Republicans were pushing. And the conservative value voters weren't going for that. They've even pulled away from support of the war, for example, along with declining support for other things. As far as the structures of power that are going to remain intact, I don't expect the elections to fundamentally change those things, but there will be some significant shifts in the committee structure in both Congress and the Senate. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the structures of power that keeps us from having intelligent discussion on issues is this tendency towards monopoly in the media. Mm-hmm. And advocates for busting up media monopoly will now be heads of key committees in both the House and the Senate. Mm-hmm. Income tax reform, moving towards a more progressive tax structure. Charlie Rangel is going to be the head of the Ways and Means in the House, and that's significant. And that will affect the disparity in income and the gaps of rich and poor. Mm-hmm. I think that the imperial presidency, which has emerged with a vengeance under Bush, the unilateralism not just of the U.S. vis-a-vis the rest of the world, but the executive branch vis-a-vis the people and Congress, that unilateralism will be reined in. There will be more checks and balances, which is, I think, a fundamental question of reestablishing a more equalizing sort of power, and it'll rein in some of the more extreme features of this administration.
Yeah, also, like, I think in terms of what Noel talked about, democratic space, gives us some democratic space so we can like even put pressure, grassroots pressure on Congress, yeah, and also on the local guys here, but to try and keep their feet, hold them to their promises, for instance, and to keep their feet to the fire so that they can like move forward with a lot of stuff, including like tax reform and other things, education and so forth, because all these things would inform what might happen here on the local level.
Well, it seems to me that what the Democrats could do, despite the disparities in the party itself, is to sit down and say, what are the things that affect not only working people, but the so-called middle class? Mm-hmm. And I would say that the war in Vietnam, clearly, without any question at all, should be dealt with. People are dying. The Iraq war, I'm sorry. Clearly, they have to do something about the minimum wage. Mm-hmm. It's been running in the National Congress for 9 years, and they haven't done a bloody thing about it. The other thing is, can we keep privatization not only of pensions but also of Social Security, of the agenda? When we figure that, for example, in Hawaii and at the national level, the baby boomers will be coming to the fore, you have to ask the question, what are we doing with Medicare? Are we going to, one, universalize health care so that everybody gets it? We don't have 46 million people without health care at all. Or are we going to just change a little bit here, for example, changing Part D, which is a drug plan, and saying, well, maybe what we ought to do is have the federal government negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies so that they can get lower prices on their drugs. This should have been done in the beginning, and it wasn't done, so that our healthcare system is falling apart. Why can't we do it the same way as other countries have done? The federal government becomes a single payer of a universal health care plan that covers everybody. What about students? Pell Grants, for example, have fallen. The fewer people getting Pell Grants. What about the young kids who are members of minority groups? They haven't had a chance to operate at all. We need to change that whole situation with regard to allowing young people the opportunity to go on to college. We're not giving them the chance because the cost of going to college has increased. So we need to look at the Pell Grant thing. One of the other things I think that is important at the national level is to take a look at the Patriot Act. Now, we reauthorized it in March of this year. Right. We have done some horrible things. We've made permanent some articles of the Patriot Act which will go on forever. In other words, what we have done with the Patriot Act has been to change the whole complex of what should be criminal things, and we've placed it in the hands of the executive rather than leaving it in the hands of the judiciary. Yes, right. We have done nothing, for example, of the sneak and peek thing, which allows the FBI to go into a home when no occupant is in there and do the search for anything which would indicate that this person does work for a foreign government and is a terrorist. We've done nothing about the fact that they can now go to the libraries, go to the finance companies and find out what you are reading, and what I am reading. They've done nothing about that. Several articles, for example, 205, 215, have all become permanent things of the Patriot Act, which are a severe blow on our civil liberties. Absolutely. And that's what we need to look after. The Democrats should take a look at what is happening basically to the civil liberties and the way in which they have changed the whole complex of individual civil liberties, tied it in with your membership in a group. It's much like what happened during the 1950s when McCarthy was in power.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, this is the thing. I interviewed Ira Rother from political science at the University of Hawaii, and he talks about the elections as well, and then we can discuss, and I'd like to know what your opinions are on what Ira said, and also what has been said by AQ as well.
This is similar to Clinton winning in '92, and then the Republicans sweep in with Newt Gingrich in '94 and win a majority of Congress, and that's a function of the Democrats having been there for a long, long time, and similar kinds of open corruption, not solving certain problems, and so forth. So I think that's a parallel. I don't think we're realigning yet. That realignment means that, similar to all of a sudden, we've watched the South become very Republican now. We're seeing a lot of the Western states becoming very solid Republican. So we saw this change, beginning with Ronald Reagan, actually, in 1980. the National Congress is going to be not as though gung-ho liberal as we saw it in the past. I think it's going to be a much more conservative. A lot of the Democrats who won are pretty conservative. I mean, they're anti-abortion and fiscal conservatives and stuff like that. So they're hardly your classic liberal Democrats. And I think mostly the Republicans lost because they were Republicans and not because the Democrats have this great specific program in mind, but everybody's rejecting this gang. I really think of it sometimes like a gang took over power in Washington. Everybody anticipated that because Bush had narrowly won, that he would have run a pretty strong bipartisan platform. But surprising to all of us, he just went on this right-wing agenda. Just, we don't have to deal with you Democrats anymore.
So, Bart, you were
fidgeting.
So, any comments on this? Because actually, it's a normal kind of analysis, that Ira is talking about in terms of who won, and why the Democrats won. And you alluded to earlier.
Well, I alluded to the competing,
Right.
versions, interpretations of what went on. And it's interesting, there's sort of a dialectical process that goes on where you look at the phenomena and one theory or explanation is offered up, and you may initially sort of adopt it, and then its pukas will emerge, the weaknesses in it will emerge to you, and then you'll see other evidence and you'll get another understanding. And I expect Ira was interviewed shortly after the election when the conventional wisdom was that it was more centrist Democrats that won, because even on election night, Tom Brokaw's and those sorts of people were putting out that line right away, which is the line representing the more conservative corporate interpretation. The reality is, if you go race by race and candidate by candidate and look at who actually won and how they ran, there are very few of the freshmen who were elected to Congress. I believe there are 4 of them that have reservations about abortion or but otherwise they're pro-choice. They're almost universally were adamantly against the war in Iraq. They are anti-NAFTA overwhelmingly. They take the strong liberal position again and again and again, and I think it's dangerous to slip into the interpretation that Ira was offering. I think it's a mistake. There will be the Democratic Leadership Council, conservative corporate influences from K Street and elsewhere in Washington trying to impose this interpretation on us and saying Democrats go slow. I don't think the Democrats should buy it. I hope they show a little more gumption. I think it's up to the people to impress upon their congressional delegation as well as their local elected officials that we expect some changes, not just that we are anti-Bush, we're actually pro-progress. We want to have programs that serve the interests of working and middle-class people rather than the very wealthy.
Right. Like, in fact, I'm thinking about Harold Ford in Tennessee. And he tried to run, to my mind, a right-of-center campaign.
Yes.
And he just
he
got wiped out.
blasted,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
And one would have thought that Harrison Ford would have been elected.
yeah, Harold, yeah.
Harold Ford.
Right, Harold.
Harrison Ford probably would have been elected.
Yeah, just like Schwarzenegger. He didn't have to do anything. Just like, elect me, I'll be back.
He was, and Harold Ford was the most conservative of the Democrats running for Senate, and he's the one that lost.
All right. Okay.
And in the possible upsets. And if you look at, in the congressional campaigns, there was Rahm Emanuel from heading the official wing of the thing from inside the Beltway, and he was trying to stop. He actually was maneuvering to block the more progressive candidates in the primary in order to have more centrist namby-pamby candidates.
Yeah, because he's a Clinton Democrat.
Yeah, and look at where he invested most of his energy, most openly, was with but Tammy Duckworth, a local girl, who was scripted to basically say nothing about the war in Iraq, even though she had lost two legs in Iraq. And because money poured in, that Rahm Emanuel was able to maneuver and outside support came in, she was able to defeat in the primary a very progressive Democrat. And yet Tammy Duckworth went down in flames in the general election. So Rahm Emanuel's strategy has been basically shown to be false, and that saying the Democrats should run to the center in order to win has been largely disproven, although not from the corporate media. The corporate media still promotes that idea.
Well, it would appear that there was nothing wrong with the democratic vision of what it is that would put our country on top for everybody. And the fact that they figured that, by golly, we can't do it, everybody else is going this way, meant that they really were for being reelected rather than being elected to do a job for the country.
Right.
There's a difference between that kind of election.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to play a segment with Noel Kent. He's talking about period of political crisis in this country. And that gives us a pause, you know, this kind of notion of political crisis, and gives us space also to try and act to pull them further to the left, you know, in terms of progressive politics.
What we're in is a policy of, we're in a period of political crisis. We're in a period of a crisis of political legitimacy in this country. I mean, a huge number of voters in these exit polls revealed that in fact they weren't enchanted with the Democrats as much as disenchanted with Republican rule, and disenchanted with the whole political process and the corruption of politics, you know, by big money, and you know, and this is something that we're in a period, a very dangerous period, because this is a period in which people no longer believe in the public life. They no longer believe that government can be an effective, provide protective security and protection for their jobs, for their homes, for their country. And that's the kind of period when demagoguery and demagogues become very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, this is the danger, and we can see it playing now because, like, of the Republicans saying, well, we lost because we were not conservative enough, at least some of them, yeah. And this is kind of interesting. Any comments on this, Q?
Well, you know, I've studied politics ever since I can remember. And there seems to be a disaffection. When you have only 53% of the people, I think it was 53, 56% who came out and voted this election. What are the other people doing? Is it because, one, they figure they're too busy to come on out and vote, or they've got it made, therefore politics don't mean a damn thing to them? Now, whether or not that is true, I have some question about. What about young people? Although young people turned out in larger numbers this time. But if they feel that their parents don't want to vote because something is wrong with the political process, either our educational system is falling down on the job, or the press, which has been so bought into the Bush administration, has been feeling, well, look, it's not important to vote anyway, these things will be done. Or is it because people feel that they no longer have any power at all to effectuate the kinds of changes they want in government?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the media is a very interesting thing. Like, look at the war in Iraq, like CNN, you know, Anderson Cooper as an example. I mean, this guy is really embedded in more ways than one, and, you know, in terms of the Iraqi war. And he is basically sold on it, like, you know, we're fighting terrorism, this, that, and the other. Hardly any critical note in that kind of coverage, which really does a disservice as the fourth estate to the country and to the people. Any comments on that? No. I mean, Bart.
What's his name? Oberman.
Oh,
Oberman's the one antidote in the commercial media, you know, on these network things. I think they're all embedded. I mean, I think that, not Oberman, but our local press, I was very disheartened watching very closely the coverage of the local campaigns by the Advertiser and by the Star Bulletin. And there was some good political reportage from the frontline reporters. Derek DePledge, I think, did some good work in particular. But the more senior people, the commentators, the pundits they have, just missed, they were lazy. They missed the story. They didn't frame the story in any exciting way. It's interesting that both Ed Case and Linda Lingle have Teflon with these guys. They see nothing wrong with them, you know, throughout their entire campaign. And I'm concerned about that. I don't know how young people or anyone else would be excited to vote when the media does a very poor job of making the exciting. Allegedly, we believe that education is one of the most important functions of the
Yes,
government,
yes.
yet there's no attention
There's-
paid to the Board of Education
Absolutely
races
not.
by the
And-
media.
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah,
you
go ahead.
know, one of the problems is with all of the difficulties we have with No Child Left Behind, there is absolutely no in-depth study of what this monstrosity bit of legislation has done to education. And it seems to me that that is one of the things that the local people should force our congressional delegation to take a look at. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have schools which are left on the wayside, and kids won't advance. They won't advance at all,
Yeah.
simply because, one, we feel that everybody should be speaking English, right?
Of course.
We give absolutely nothing, no opportunities for minority kids to learn English in different ways. Very, very difficult. And it seems to me that that is one of the areas in which we should really work on. Oh, the other thing is this, the cost of living. Nobody has done anything about it. Do you realize what it costs me, for example, to drive my car or to take a bus? It costs what now $2.84 per gallon of regular gas. I can catch the bus at $30 per year anytime that I want to as a senior citizen. But what about others who have to put in $2, or if you're a student, you put in $1? It all costs money.
Of course.
And we've done nothing about taking care of the cost of living simply because of the way in which we have ordered the economic system. The NAFTAs and the CAFTAs have a lot to do with it. The fact that we have exported capital, we no longer do things for ourselves. Somebody said, what about tax credit? You mentioned the tax system. We have never done a study of the tax system and whether or not the kinds of tax incentives that we now give to people actually work, or are they grabbing the money and running away?
It would be nice, actually,
See?
if in this next legislative session, I think the time is right to start demanding accountability on those tax credits, the high-tech tax
Yes,
credits and others that went towards
absolutely.
filmmaking
Yes,
and
yes,
things.
yes.
I think there's, I find it frustrating that oftentimes it's Democrats that swallow the thing who know nothing about economics. Not all Democrats. Some Democrats know things about economics, but the ones, they're trying so hard to not be viewed as anti-business.
Anti-business.
And they bend over backwards and they say, okay, it'll be a clean industry, it'll be high-tech, and they give away the store.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In
Absolutely.
fact, I want to go to another segment with Noel, and I asked him how might the national election impact Hawaii in a different way than what we have been suggesting, but related to it.
My fears are this means more militarization of Hawaii, more military bases, more, more just a greater military presence in the islands, and I think we've already have an overbearing amount of bases and military people, and I mean, the university, of course, with York is in the process of being militarized also, and to me this is very dangerous, not only because people talk about it making Hawaii a target, but it also distorts our economy. It makes us dependent on continued military expenditures, and this becomes a real problem, and also puts a lot of pressure on the DOE and the school system to provide places for the kids who will be coming with military families and all of that. So there's a lot of negatives in terms of turning Hawaii into this sort of militarized bastion, this Festung, this Fortress Pacific. I mean, this is not an unalloyed joy. And I wish Norway, for instance, was on a different committee and was funneling funds for research and development and innovative technologies in terms of the climate and greenhouse gases and things like this. That would and fuel efficiencies. That would be. I'd much rather see this going down. So this I think. the fact that our senators will have more clout on the committees they sit on is not an unalloyed sort of blessing for me.
Well, at least Inouye is not going to bring money to dig for oil in Hawaii. You know what I mean? So this is. So what do you think?
Well, you know, the interesting part about our dependence, for example, on the military, is the fact that there was a group in Hawaii who fought against the strikers coming to Hawaii, and the court says, look, you have not filed an EPA report. Now, these are the kinds of things at the grassroots level that are important for us to study and to see what effect that they would have on the way we live our lives. Right. It happens at places like Pohakuloa. We say, well, gee, there's nothing wrong with Hawaii. We live in in a very good place. Everybody's happy, and yet we also know that according to the news story this evening, 14–15% of the Hawaiians live in poverty. And we also know that although the healthcare people tell us that only about 10% of our people do not have health care, they don't give us all of the figures. And they scream and they yell because, one, Medicaid does not reimburse hospitals, Medicare does not reimburse hospitals, and yet at the last session of the legislature, we passed a universal health care bill. But the governor vetoed it because it had to be put in another bill where people said that mercury was the source of autism. There has been absolutely no study in the entire world which shows that this kind of mercury has any effect at all on autism. Now, we're talking about what happens at the federal level. Well, maybe what the states have to do is to force the federal government to do universal health care by themselves enacting legislation. However we do it, but clearly the national political Democratic Party has to put this on their agenda. Absolutely no reason why states should have to muck around with all of the extreme costs that are involved in this. So
I'm going to go to a segment with Ira Roter also on Hawaii, and then we can comment on it.
You've got to discriminate between pork, classic pork, which is building highways to nowhere or whatever that is. A lot of funding going into military here, but that's because the military wants military spending, or it's congruent with a lot of stuff that's been coming in here has been like building housing and stuff, with Abercrombie's been a part of. And so in a way, that's taken the pressure off of our affordable housing issue here a little bit, because if the military are living on base rather than out here competing for private housing with the subsidy, it takes some pressure off there. But a lot of money's come in here. In a way, it's fascinating to me that we fund organic agriculture. We're funding these energy programs. I think because Akaka's here now, we're going to have to fund our veterans' care. The whole military, I mean, these people are so disabled now and psychic stress and all that. So it's not just bringing in the classic pork. I think that the country is going to shift into being more environmentally responsible, more energy alternatives. So I think that will, because we've got people anybody anywhere is going to be seeing more of that, but I think because we have people at the top, our seniority does work, we're going to be beneficiaries.
Okay, so two contrasting views in terms of what Inouye might do or not do, or at least, you know, the congressional delegation. So, and you want to?
Well, when I first saw the committee assignments after the Democrats took control, and I worked hard on Senator Akaka's campaign, and I did it in part in the framework of trying to win back the Senate. I thought that was very possible. But then when I saw the committee assignments and I saw that Senator Inouye was going to be in a position to bring home the pork, military pork in particular, I got a little distressed. I thought, okay, there'll be a striker brigade in every valley. There'll be a carrier group needed for Hilo Harbor and Port Allen and everything else. And it's exaggerated, but I do have those concerns. And there were a lot of us who were involved in peace and justice movements who do not look forward to that side effect of the Democrats taking over. There are benefits. In some ways, I put this in the framework similar to AQ was talking about how particularly minority and working class kids have a hard time going to college, even middle class kids, because of the cutback in federal loans. That's in part in order to, if you want job training, you got to go into the military. It's part of the economic draft. If we want to have jobs here in Hawaii, same thing. Take military dependent jobs, you know. They'll give federal dollars for military-related things. They won't give for more basic human needs. And so we're caught in this dependency that we have to break. And it happens in terms of individuals, but also happens in terms of the state economy as a whole. And we have to wean ourselves off that. And how to do that in a way, I think the housing contracts that were brought in, he mentioned those with Abercrombie's influence, but also Senator Inouye, that provided a lot of jobs, and really, more than anything any other local elected official did, helped raise the standard of living here, certainly for working class people in the building trades. But that creates a climate in which we are not necessarily as desperate for these other military kinds of jobs coming in. And it may be a good time for us to say, no, we don't need those things.
Well, you know, actually, the homeless problem is where we can make an impact. For example, not very long ago, there was an article in the paper saying that we were ready to sell 12 publicly built housing areas to private industry. And if you look at the Kukui Garden thing, that is a prime example.
Right.
Under the HUD rules and regulations, people who live in a publicly built HUD homes can, in fact, buy those homes. They can form a corporation, and there is no reason why we should eliminate that stock, that housing stock, away from market and make it a lot more difficult to rent homes in those public constructed areas. The other thing is, we can begin to build homes. There was an article in the paper about, well, we're going to build some homes there in the Kaka'ako area, but do you know what it'll cost? $362,000. Who can afford that? What we need to do is to look to the Hawaiian Homes Commission, to look at state and county facilities to see whether there is land that we can devote to rental housing. Lots of people don't feel that home ownership is all it's cut out to be. My God, I have a home now. I pay more in insurance, and I've got to take care of a wall that's falling apart. I've got to take care of eaves that are falling apart. Probably it would be better if I were to rent a home. At my age, what would I do with a home? Well, there are people in society who just wish to rent a home. And with the elderly getting more and more prevalent in our society, we have to provide housing for them. And it may not be housing, for example, that they're living in. And it seems to me that this is a way of providing the kind of job construction that you were talking about, the building and construction trades. We won't need to depend on the military. We can get federal funds outside of the military to build these homes for our people who are still living on beaches.
I was working today in a $4.5 million condo down on Ala Moana Boulevard.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. On the 28th floor, looking out over the view, and I looked at this, and I could start talking to some of the other workers who were there, and I brought it around to the tax structure. Is that because there's this growing disparity of wealth and income, and partly as a result of the changing of the economy, the global economy, partly a result of the tax structure, the rich are getting richer, and working class people are stagnating for the last 30 years and working longer hours on average. And one of the results is all the surplus income that is going to the small group. They're buying second homes and third homes in Hawaii, one of the most desirable places in the world, and that's further aggravating and distorting our housing market. So I'm in this $4.5 million unit, which was brand new, and they gutted it in order to renovate it and customize it for the new owner.
Yeah.
Oh my
Well,
goodness.
this is a problem that speaks to the larger issue of uneven development in the economy, and this is something in Hawaii, has been in Hawaii for the longest time,
Yeah,
since Jack
yeah.
Burns, if not before. But if you have more military spending, etc., that will make it more uneven, this development. And so if we depend on tourism, military, and construction related to tourism and the military in a sense, that is going to create more of a problem for Hawaii development and not alleviate the problems that we already have. So this is something that I think is a serious matter for everyone in terms of especially the brain drain. Students finish studies here, and what kind of job are they going to get? They're not going to get any real job that can have them afford a house here or a home or an apartment or what have you, or even rent one for that matter, So I want to go to Noel's talking about, the segment he's talking about how Hawaii is already overdeveloped, and then we can discuss further.
We're overdeveloped already.
Yeah.
I mean, Hawaii, there should have been a moratorium on development years ago. I mean, not only we're overdeveloped as a tourism place, but there are too many people on Oahu certainly, and perhaps Maui and other areas. The carrying capacity of our water, the ability of this ecosystem to sustain this many people, this many cars, and this many, is really being challenged now.
Yeah. So, here, I mean, this is the kind of thing like overdevelopment. And Noel, has written a book on the question of underdevelopment in Hawaii and this whole notion of bad development, maldevelopment that has been impacting us for the longest time. So what would the legislature need to do to,
Well, all we need to do is to take a look at the arguments we have gone over for 20 long years as to whether we do or do not have a rail system and where it should run from and to. And we've already taxed ourselves so that we will be paying more in our general excise tax. Everybody worries. No, people love their automobiles. They won't get into a rail system. They won't get into a bus system. And it seems to me that what we need to do is alter the way in which we look at transportation. Is it really getting to a place as rapidly as we can, or is it giving us the opportunity to sit in a rail, on a rail system or on a bus system, which gives us the opportunity to enjoy Hawaii? It seems to me that all we're thinking of is how can we get there the fastest with the mostest, and a large measure of it is due to the nature of our economic system.
Well, in the system of how we pay for transportation in many ways, it's like once you buy an automobile, once you make your 6-month payment on insurance and everything, then the marginal cost of driving a car are very low. So you're going to continue, if you have a car, you're going to continue to drive a car rather than go on a mass transit system. But if you take the kind of money we're spending in the course of a year and used it for transportation, then mass transit would look much more rational, much more sensible.
Yeah. I want to go to another rather 3-minute piece by Ira, and we're talking about the elections as well.
Well, I think there are probably two periods in her career. The first 2 years, when she came in and had a set of goals, like the education one, where she wanted to improve education, and her emphasis was on creating decentralized school boards, and that was a bombshell. A bomb. It just blew up nowhere because she hadn't really thought it out, and it just kind of hit a brick wall. Anyways, the last year or two, she's been much more conciliatory and has been much more in the vanguard. So, and I'm speculating, as I always do, that she's looking to become national, right? She's going to run for Congress. She's going to run either in 2010, she might run in 2008 if one of our senators forced to resign for health reasons. So she's got to establish a mark in achievements. And as I look at the things that she's been leading to charge on, she's done a terrific job on the Northwest Islands. She was a big supporter for that. She's done a really good job on energy, alternative energy, renewables and stuff. Much better than Democrats here because she's less encumbered by their alliances with HECO. She's done affordable housing. She's worked on charter schools. I'm speculating that I was trying to think through. I think education is hard to deal with, but I could see as governor, she can do a hell of a lot on affordable housing and on homelessness. And so, because she's been undercutting the Democrats on these issues. She's not out there trying to cut taxes on the rich. I mean, she's adopted this really classic liberal agenda. They haven't pushed on abortion issues. They haven't pushed on the stem cell stuff. She's been very quiet about things like the death with dignity kind of thing. So I'm guessing, in the way I gave her this, I wrote this sort of satirical piece about Karl Rove giving her advice some years ago, and she didn't bite, of course. I could see her taking on this persona, like Whitman, Christine Whitman, who was the governor of New Jersey, who then moved into a national scene, and poor lady became environmental head for a short period. So I could see her establishing this, quote, compassionate conservative argument with really delivering the goods. And she could link up with the Christian right on the issues of poverty and housing. She's got a real problem with environment because she is in bed with the developers. But the Democrats are too, so I don't know, it matters. I just kind of a thought of mine that she could really undercut the Dems and kept saying, okay, let's do these kinds of things. And so they're going to be backpedaling.
Yeah, because I asked Ira about what could Lingle do with this new environment, local and national. Yeah. Bart, do you want to?
Well, I'd like to bet Ira publicly here as to whether Lingle's going to deliver the goods in any of these things. I'm not sure what she's done on energy self-sufficiency. She's in the pocket of the oil companies. The entire Republican Party here has taken overwhelmingly, the 90-something% of all the contributions from the oil companies have gone to the Republicans locally. She opposed the gas cap. She has the power to initiate that. She's not made any effort to have transparency in the profits, these mega profits that Chevron and the oil companies are making here. So she does symbolic things, and I think I wasn't a big Randy Iwase fan, but that constant refrain that Randy did was she's got a PR operation. He said that her effort on decentralizing the Board of Education didn't go anywhere. It served the function it was meant to serve. The function was to say she cared about education, she's trying to do something about it, but she's stymied. And so she's able to fight this symbolic side action diversionary fight and appear like she was on the side of good, but it didn't accomplish anything, and it wasn't really intended to accomplish anything except for to give her some press. So I don't think she's going to deliver any goods in the time. It may be enough, given that she has a very favorable corporate media here, for her to go to Congress or go to the Senate without having delivering anything. One thing that's very interesting is the absence of coattails. She won herself very handily. Almost everybody she supported did not. The Republicans lost 2 House seats. They went from 19, I believe, when she first came in as governor. They're down 15, to 8 in the House.
Yes.
Now 8. Yeah.
They're down to 8 in the House. Each election, it's been worse and worse. The people she supported for the Board of Education were defeated. On Maui, she supported Arakawa against Tavares. She lost that. You look at Kauai. Kauai was one of these islands where the Republicans were making a resurgence, and yet the Democrats basically swept the county council over there. She has no coattails. It's a Linda Lingle party. She hasn't rebuilt the Republican Party, even though they're getting lots of money from their energized local base and lots of national money.
Yeah. So, in fact, I'm going to go back to Ira because I asked him about, her base and her relationship to the Christian right, for instance. Yeah.
I don't think she has that much interest in the Christian right base, because if she did, she had to, the platform would say something about stem cell and abortion. It doesn't. It's mute. And I think the proof of that, she doesn't care too much about that right-wing group, which I'd call the Grassroots Institute type people. Her replacing Jerry Coffey, who's a really classic conservative, and a pro-war McCain type, with Cynthia Thielen, who's a classic liberal on virtually everything. She's good on every damn thing, on Hawaiian issues, on gender issues.
So, question here. How come, look, as you say, well, I mean, of course, the Republicans have been defeated here even more than before. But how come the Democrats swept both houses, in the legislature, and then Iwasi didn't make it? Lingle made it, who was a Republican. So what would you attribute that to, either of you?
Well, I don't think that Iwasi, even after he served in the legislature and in the city council, was well known enough. He certainly may have taken some stands on issues which were pertinent at that particular time that he served in office. But he's been out of politics for quite a while. Malama Solomon, on the other hand, was a fighter when she was a senator, but she's been out of office for a while. They haven't been in the public limelight, and it's very, very difficult for a group to come on up, do a creditable job if you haven't been noticed by the public for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think there is something to this notion that the voters want there to be sort of a checks and balance here. I think that they want the Democrats to represent them in Congress, in the Senate, and
So
and
does
actually
this play also locally?
Yes, that's and local voters want to have a congressional delegation that's Democrat. They're hostile to Bush. One thing that happened was in play in the local election, even though I joked about it, we were using the slogan sort of "Stop the War in Iraq, vote Iwasi Solomon," and that didn't take. But it did create a context in which voters who may not know either candidate a local House race tended to vote Democrat. They were hostile, they were anti-Republican because they were anti-Bush. And I think that helped us in marginal races where there were unknown candidates. I don't think Iwasi was a very strong candidate. I don't think Malama Solomon was. You say people don't know their names. My memories of them from when they were active are not real favorable. I think Randy talked a good game during this campaign and talked traditional Democratic values, and they kind of made me feel good about him, but I had memories. And I'm a loyal Democrat, and I couldn't get enthused about him. But I think that the voters like having Linda Lingle is clearly not an ideological Republican. She seems relatively competent, although it's mostly PR I think she's competent at, and she seems relatively honest. And I think that the voters kind of don't trust the Democrats with having total monopolistic control of the state of Hawaii. And I think that therefore she's sort of a safety check on the Democrats.
So actually the voters are real akamai on that issue then, in terms of Hawaii.
Certainly they didn't. The voters here did not have what the voters at the national level contended with, which was outright corruption. There wasn't that here anyway. The corruption appeared at the Liquor Commission thing, the ever housing problem, etc. But by and large, it wasn't really that kind of corruption that disturbed the people.
Well, I'm not sure if the press wants it to go after. Yeah, I mean,
Probably
there are
not.
troubling relationships of the new boy, new girl relationship in the Lingle group. It's a smaller group than the Democrats' old boy network. But some of the university housing contracts, for example, they no longer went to local AJA engineering firms and construction firms. They went to Texas-based companies run by allies of George Bush. Now, that's disturbing to me. And the press didn't want to touch it here.
Well, the interesting thing about it is that whole Lagaretta situation as well on the Board of Regents. The millions of dollars that are coming up for the university, not only to do new buildings, but to alter old buildings, repair old, the rot that is in the old buildings. And can you imagine? A person like Lagaretta can really effectuate who is going to get those contracts. You know?
Now, she did recuse herself from the housing
Yes,
contract.
she did. Of course she did.
You know.
Yes.
Yeah, but still, the same kind of politics that was happening with the UH under the Democrats when, you know, the administration was a Democrat. Same thing is happening under Lingle.
Except we kept the money local.
You know, I mean, you know, what's the difference?
But you look at the constitutional amendment there, right?
Right.
That's another place Lingle lost on
yes,
things.
she lost.
right.
Is they want to restrict her
Yes,
power to
that's-
unilaterally appoint the regents. And I think
Right.
there's some unhappiness. There was this panacea that was being offered that if we let the university be autonomous, it'll be free from political interference. What it meant was autonomy for Kitty Lagaretta and
Yeah.
Linda Lingle's people
That's
to
right.
run the university
Yeah,
unilaterally.
people saw through that, I think, you know. And then the other thing, I mean, in terms of, like, we're talking about militarization and so on, and Noel mentioned it about the University Affiliated Research Center. I mean, that is now, I don't know if it is going to be, it's going to, the Board of Regents is going to vote on it again, but the thing is that whether the people can stop it or not, that remains to be, you know, seen. And this is something that also Lingle has a lot to do with. Also, of course, the Democratic senators, which brings me to the point to ask, you know, is there a possibility of a different kind of politics in Hawaii that really is neither, you know, Republican or Democrat, but some kind of grassroots kind of politics that would be able to pressure those progressive Democrats at this point so that they can, you know, politics can move a little bit to a more progressive area than it already has? Anyone?
Well, it seems to me that this is a time when people ought to say, we don't like what's happening. And unless members of the political parties also have that same kind of vision, it's a very slow process. You practically need a revolution for changes to occur, basically.
Just like the 54 revolution, you mean?
Yeah,
or
well,
no?
certainly that was part of it. That was part of it.
Well, I think
Because-
that there is, the unions played a major role in
yes,
that revolution.
absolutely, yes.
There has been some interesting activity locally lately.
With Local 5.
And this group FACE.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yeah.
And it is this labor community alliance kind of thing, which I think is essential. I work with what we're calling progressive Democrats. But a lot of the people who view themselves as progressives don't have a gut level understanding of labor and labor issues. And we have to build some trust and build alliances there. And I think that's sort of one of the key things we're going to have to do in the immediate period is try to strengthen those relationships.
Yeah. So
Well, they've been
yeah.
going on for years, for heaven's sakes. We've been, the labor movement has been accused of running the bloody parties, for heaven's sakes.
So hopefully, like in the next period, because we're having more democratic space nationally and locally, more grassroots politics would come to the fore and try to move things forward.
Well, they should also make reformation of the National Labor Relations Act.
Right.
That'll certainly help it.
So anyway, we're almost out of time, and so I want to thank our viewers for watching, and thank you for helping us in this discussion. And for the viewers, see you next month. Aloha.